Welcome back to our Risky Business podcast number 6, where we're talking about budget season and why smart businesses plan before they panic. As always, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Dave D and Dave O. So, unless you've been living under a rock, you'll know that the Australian budget dropped and instantly everyone had a hot take. But whether you love it or hate it highlights something important. Budgets are about choices. They're about deciding what matters, what needs investment, and what you're willing to deprioritize. And honestly, businesses should be doing the same thing, but with a lot less drama. So Dave D, I'll start with you. How do you think that businesses can learn from the way governments prioritise spending?
I think I'm probably the last person to ask about financial advice, but I think over the years, having run commands and big budgets and so forth, and being involved in budget formations when I was in the deputy's office, I think that the simple thing is to run it like it's a household budget and, plan ahead, think of what the risks are, put some money aside for those things that you can't see, and just really plan. It always seems from governments that they are reactive in their funding and they're reactive in their spending. And I think businesses could certainly take away that, you can't just manage in the now. You have to manage into the future, and you have to start planning, which you do in your family budget. And yes, you take calculated risks when you invest or buy a house or whatever the case may be, or a new car. So I just think that's the framework I've lived by is, would I spend this at home? Would I not spend this at home? Why wouldn't I? And just, that's the governance framework I put around financial policies in my world.
Yeah. And planning doesn't apply just to budgets in organisations. It's across the whole organisation. So it just happens to also fall into budgeting as well. And Dave O, do you think organisations underestimate how early they should start planning their budgets?
Yeah, absolutely. They do. Look, one of the biggest mistakes they make is treating budgeting as a finance only exercise rather than it should be a strategic exercise. Reality is, by the time you're formally discussing, the budget cycle has come around, many of the decisions that'll shape the budget, they've already been made. So new projects being proposed, risks have emerged, staffing needs have changed, technology is aging and market conditions are shifting. So if you wait for that budget cycle to start, thinking about the issues, you're already behind. So the organisations that do budgeting really well, they start earlier. They're constantly scanning their environment. They're identifying future risks and opportunities. What they're asking is, what capabilities are we going to need for the next 6 months, 12 months, or even 3 years from now? Because from a risk and resilience perspective, budgeting is really about preparedness. You've got to put it in that view as you go forward. We often see businesses scrambling when something unexpected happens, and we've talked about this ad nauseum. A cyber issues, supply chain disruption, regulatory change, or an economic downturn. But those events are usually far less damaging when the organisation's actually invested, because I look at budgeting, investing in capability, training, technology, and contingency planning. Because what I find interesting is that people often think budgeting is about restricting spending. I don't think it is. I think in reality, good budgeting is about enabling the right spending. So spending it in the right place. It's about deliberately allocating resources to the things that matter the most and ensuring you're not caught making reactive decisions under pressure, which, let's face it, that's going to cost you more. So yeah, look, I really do think organisations start too late. Smartest businesses don't wait for a budget cycle. They're having strategic budget conversations all year round. They're adjusting all year round, which means when formal budget decisions arrive, they're making informed decisions rather than panicked decisions.
Yeah. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see in businesses is only budgeting for keeping the lights on. But if you want growth, resilience, or even just smooth operations, you need to budget for uplift. Things like training, scenario planning, capability building, and yes, sometimes even external consultancy. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's like a tune-up on a car. Dave D, what uplift areas do you think organisations consistently overlook when budgeting?
Oh, I think we've already touched on them. I really believe that they don't do a lot of the exercising. That's one of the first things they don't do. So exercising goes, updating plans, running business continuity, frameworks, and just testing these
Yeah.
things. And then, as you said, they just operate to keep the lights on, and then the balloon hits the fan or the proverbial, and then all of a sudden they're scrambling. And if I take that back to your first question, that's what happened with the government spend, right? So they don't plan for these things. So if you look at the fuel crisis, a perfect example, the amount of money that they would have spent since this started back in when the war started, is all the tax that they've missed out on because they've reduced the tax on fuel, the cost of who knows what the cost to Australian society is long term for the promises made by Albanese when he's gone to Malaysia and all those places to secure deals. So that's a perfect example, is just not planning ahead, not understanding the risks or foreseeable risks, and really just operating in the now. And then that usually costs you a lot more. And we find that even in emergency management world that we work in, it is, if you don't plan for these things, you don't exercise, you don't train for these things, or you don't update your plans or whatever or test your plans, it usually costs you more. And unfortunately, in an emergency management world, sometimes that can cost lives.
Absolutely. And Davo, how can leaders make the case internally for investing in training or consultancy before problems arise?
Yeah, look, I think the whole conversation has got to be changed from cost to value. So, too often when we talk about training, capability development, external expertise, they're all viewed as discretionary spending because the benefits aren't always immediately visible on a balance sheet, a line item. This is what it costs. But if you take a strategic view, these investments are really about creating future capacity, capability, and reducing future vulnerability. So as Dave was alluding to, the question shouldn't be, can we afford to invest in training or consultancy? It should be about, can we afford not to? Because every organisation faces uncertainty. Look, that could be economic volatility, workforce challenges, cyber threats, regulatory change, which we've seen more and more, or shifting customer expectations. So the responsibility is back on an organisation that navigates those challenges more effectively are usually the ones that invest before the challenge arrives. And good leaders also understand that capability is a strategic asset. So we're getting back to the point before. Don't look at it as just financial. They readily invest in physical assets, technology, infrastructure, because you get a return. It's a visible return. Yet an organisation's ability to make decisions, adapt, innovate, and respond under pressure is equally as important, but that capacity does not appear overnight. It's got to be developed. And how do you do that? You invest in training. So the most compelling business case is often linking investment directly to organisational outcome, better decision making, faster adaptation, stronger resilience, improved performance, greater confidence in managing uncertainty. That's a really big one. And those are all things that will give your business a competitive advantage.
Yeah. And from my perspective, uplift, it's like preventative maintenance. You don't wait for the engine to explode before you change the oil. And the organisations that budget for uplift early are the ones that avoid the expensive emergencies later. Now, let's talk about something that sounds simple but is surprisingly rare, and that's paying on time. And I think we've all been on the other end of that. But look, it's just generally, it's good practice, it's respectful, and it builds trust, especially when we're talking about consultants and suppliers. And here's the thing, good consultants will only bill for what they actually use. So if a painter quotes for 5 days but finishes in 4 and only charges for 4, you'll remember that and you'll hire them again and you'll recommend them. And that's how relationships are built. Dave D, why do you think some organisations struggle with timely payments, even when they value the relationship?
Yeah, look, it's a good question, Emma, and something I reflected on when you sent me the questions is, I think, excuse me, one of the common themes that seem to go around with those organisations that are slow payers, and I know Dave will talk about something a bit later, but it's a organisation that has a bad culture, and that bad culture could be a number of reasons. They operate in silos, they overthink things, or they just tie themselves up in bureaucratic decision making And I think overthinking is a good example. You see a lot of, especially government departments and pseudo government departments, that have tied themselves up in so much bureaucratic process to make sure that they are fiscally responsible, but it's tipped over the edge and then becomes a very clunky system to enforce. And as you said, it does affect the relationship of the employer and the employee, or the consultant. In our case, we're a small consultancy, and when we have to wait for payment, it can be disruptive. And quite frankly, shoes on the other foot with a consultant, go, well, I don't really want to work for that client anymore because I'm operating in the red for periods of time, and that's not good business practice as well for the the consultancy. And we go back all the way up to the top of this conversation. Then the things that we have to then start compromising are those planning and those activities and those testings and all those things. So it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle and a really difficult way to operate.
Hmm. I think you raise a good point with government organisations. It's that red tape. I think, sort of back in the day, it probably wouldn't have been an issue, but now there are so many systems in place that no one even knows what the system is anymore. And something as simple as pressing a button, making a payment, has to go through different sections and different forms, and it just creates that delay.
Yeah, I'm certainly not saying get away from that governance structure, but
Hmm.
I think they've got to find a nice balance between
Yes.
streamlining and governance rather than bureaucratic decision making.
Agree. Agree. And Davo, what's the long term impact on supplier relationships when businesses pay late or inconsistently?
Oh, look, it's often a lot greater than what organisations realise, because supplier relationships, we've said it, fundamentally it's built on trust. So when a business consistently pays late or unpredictably, sends a very clear signal, and we as a consultant get that signal. It tells suppliers, consultants and contractors the relationship is transactional rather than a genuine partnership. So over time, that's going to erode goodwill. Goodwill is often one of the most valuable forms of organisational capital. So what businesses have to realise is that suppliers or consultants, us, we have choices about who we want to work with. So you actually gravitate towards organisations that are professional, reliable, and actually are easy to do business with, saves the hassle. So if your organisation develops a reputation for late payments, you may still get the service, but you won't get the service from the best people, fastest response, or the strongest commitment when you actually need it most. So from a strategic perspective, resilience is built through relationships. During periods of disruption, organisations often rely heavily on external partners for expertise, surge capacity, specialist skills, and critical supplies. The relationships don't suddenly become strong during a crisis. They're built over many months, years, and we've said that. One of the things is, if you look at a lot of businesses, do what we have referred to in other podcasts as just-in-time orders, as in fuel. So it arrives, and as soon as it arrives, it's put in the ground and the bowsers, it's pumping straight away because of the cash flow and that. But does that build up the relationships when you want, all of a sudden you run into a crisis or emergency where you rely on that goodwill, and the goodwill is, well, you haven't paid your last invoice. So I'll go to the good payers first. You may still get what you want, but it'll be delayed. So it's got to be trust through both parties. Ultimately, paying isn't don't just look at it as a financial process. It's a leadership decision. It shapes your reputation, and it influences the strengths of your networks and partnerships that you depend on, particularly in times of crisis or need.
Yeah. For me, paying on time, it's just one of the easiest ways to show professionalism. And when consultants see that you're fair, transparent, and respectful, they go the extra mile and it becomes a partnership, not a transaction, as you said. If I had to give businesses one piece of advice for budget season, it's this: don't just budget for what you already know, budget for what you want to become. That means setting aside funds for capability uplift, planning for scenarios, and giving yourself room to adapt. Dave D, what's one practical budgeting habit that you wish every organisation adopted?
Plan ahead and plan for the unknown. Simple as
Yeah.
that. As I
Yeah.
said, it's just simple to me. And I said at the top of the conversation, for me, it's always treat it like your household budget. And you touched on it before. Do I want my car to perform? Then I get it serviced. If I miss the services and then it breaks down, it's going to cost me a lot more money in the end. Apply that principle across your organisation, and I think you'll be in good stead going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And Devo, if a business is starting its budget planning late, what's the first thing that they should prioritize?
I think they need to focus on priorities, not on line items. So they've got to start looking, they're late, what are the few things that will have the greatest impact on our success over the next 12 months? So just pick 3 areas. Don't over complicate things, as we've said. Look at your critical activities, keep the organisation operating. Then look at your key risks that could significantly disrupt your performance if left unmanaged. And third, what are your strategic opportunities that could improve capabilities, competitiveness, or growth? That's the important thing, because that then builds flexibility in with leaders. And it also means that your budgeting process isn't a panicked process. That's really important.
Yeah. The Australian budget might be stirring up debate, but it's also a good reminder for everyone that planning matters, especially this time of the year. So, whether you're a government or a small business, your budget is your strategy in numbers. Dave D and Davo, thank you for both joining me today. And to everyone listening, remember, budget early, invest in Uplift, and pay your people on time. It's amazing how far those things will take you. Thanks for listening to our Risky Business podcast. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Em. Thanks,
Thank
Dave.
you. Thanks, Dave.